All right, so hey everyone. Today I want to take another look at the Gamesir Nexus options. I made a video on this previously and listed three issues with the implementation. And since there's been updates since, two of those issues have been fixed. And the larger of the two was that um, the anti-dead zone values would be wrong if you set the curve to anything but linear. So you can see we have a linear curve right now, and we have the exact output range we want. So 50 to 80%, exactly. However, when we apply a very slow curve, see that it should be starting at 50, but it's actually starting at about 18 and ending at about 46%. And the exact opposite will be true if we reverse this, where we want it to start at 50, it's actually starting about 82%, and to end at 80, but it's ending at 95%. So if we actually start with circle and change the anti-dead zone to 50, you can see that it jumps to 50%. And previously, if you used a curve aside from linear, if the curve started slower, this would push down the values, and if it started faster, it would push them out. But as you can see, I changed the curve, but the um, position has stayed the same. So that's been corrected, and that's extremely useful because this means that you can set the curves and anti-dead zones to the values you want and not have to worry about it. Previously, if you wanted to adjust the curve, you'd also have to compensate by changing the values to uh, compensate for that changed these change values. So that's been fixed. The other thing was that when I first got the controller, the raw mode is 10% faster than the circle. So if we move this to 50% and switch to raw, you can see a jump to 55%. So it's 10% faster than circle. However, at some point they increased this to be 20% faster. However, with this 10%, that's why you have this extra diagonal range, which is useful for games using axial dead zones. However, when they increase it to 20%, this same cap was applied. So you didn't get the extra error, which would be useful for those games with much larger axial dead zones, but still lost a bit of range of motion. So it was just you just lost range of motion without the extra diagonal benefit. So that's been changed back to 10%. So you get uh, back to the way it was previously, and you're not wasting any range of motion. Something that did appear was that you can see that the stick can actually move beyond this range. It's a little difficult to see that it's kind of white on white, but the stick position can move outside of this boundary. However, if you set anything past these default values, so if you use different curves or different dead zone values, you can see that it's locked to that range. If we go back to this linear, we can go further. So this isn't an actual issue. What seems to happen is that there's an underlying base error that's the circle mode is suppressing. You can see that your stick can actually move further than this range, but the circle mode is ignoring that. I had estimated this base circularity error to be about 6 to 7%, and then raw is increasing the range by 10% and gives you about an 8% error. And what seems to be happening is this is simply just adding that underlying base error with the error from the raw mode calculation. So nothing wrong with this. It's just the previously hidden portion of this error is being shown specifically at these settings, and then otherwise the base error is being hidden with any other settings. So nothing wrong, just a quirk, but kind of interesting. The last thing I brought up that wasn't fixed was that um, s- the raw mode being 10% faster than the circle mode seems to be calculated at the end, so past the anti-dead zone calculations, and this makes them wrong. So, and one thing that's kind of interesting is if we set this to 50, you can see that on circle mode, it's fine, it's jumping to 50%. But if we switch to raw mode, for some reason this value doesn't work on raw, it just goes back to normal. But if we move this to 51, it works fine. 49, it works fine. So I don't know why that's wrong. You'll almost never need to use a specifically 50% anti-dead zone, but I don't know exactly why that specific value is off. But anyway, if we move to about 51 to demonstrate this, um, go back to circle. Well, actually, we can just leave it there. So the circle mode is correct at 50%, but if we move it to raw, it might be a little difficult to see it shimmering. But if we move to raw, it moves up a little bit. And if we move back to circle, it falls down a bit. This is a little easier to see if I move this to 80. You can see at circle mode, you have a max value of 80, as you should. But if we go down to raw, the max is 88%, so 10% faster. The values you set are 10% larger um, than they should be when using raw. Um, this has a very easy fix if you want to use specifically whatever anti-dead zone value you want. For example, if you wanted to use 50 and use it with the correct value in raw, all you'd have to do is divide that value by 1.1 and input that. So if you wanted to use 80, you'd just divide by 1.1 and then use that value. And then when you were using raw, you'd get an 80% uh, anti-dead zone max value. But I did request previously that this raw mode calculation be fixed in a variety of other ways. For example, having an outer dead zone set before this initial dead zone calculation. Um, that would allow that extra range to be applied very early on, and then it wouldn't affect anything. It wouldn't affect the anti-dead zone calculations. Additionally, the circle and raw modes could only differ in that raw wouldn't clamp the values like circle does, where it clamps it to the circular range, whereas raw would just allow it to move beyond that and simply allow the players to customize the outer dead zone values, which would directly control the level of circularity. So if you move this down to about 70%, you could actually get a full square out of it, whereas, and then everything in between would allow you to specifically fine tune the exact error you want. But since you can just divide by 1.1 to get your anti-dead zone values accurate, that's not a big deal. The one thing that I requested in the other video that I will re-request here is adding an anti-axial dead zone. What's here is an anti-radial dead zone, and if I move the stick in tiny circles, you can see that it pushes outward in a circular range. However, an anti-axial dead zone would counter axial dead zones, which create central squares of unregistered movement and have a cross of restricted diagonal movement. The only way to counter that would be to offset the stick both vertically and horizontally to skip over those regions. And I'd like to request that that option be added. I gave some code to be able to do that and play well with the radial anti-dead zone and outer dead zone values that are already here. There are countless games that use axial dead zones, and even a lot of games that use axial dead zones with radial dead zones on top of that, and being able to have both anti-radial and axial dead zones would allow players to counter that directly. So, and with both those options, you can cleanly counter those so that you can change those types of dead zones into radial dead zones completely. So I think if Gamesir is able to do that, their controllers are quite reasonably priced, and with this support for the Nexus app, that would make them some of the most affordable controllers with the best customization, at least that I'm aware of, um, available. But the last thing to cover, which is new, I didn't cover this before, is the joystick resolution. So this is a cool option. So by default, this is 12-bit, which is, I think, the 4096 steps. But you can now customize the exact um, resolution you want. So 8-bit is 256 steps. And that's actually what's being displayed on this interface even before this option was given. You can see that the 0.79 is the increment that's represents 8-bit. So the display here has always been 8-bit. And if you're used to playing with PlayStation controllers, those controllers output 8-bit resolution. So if you were fine with those, there's nothing worse here. I'm not exactly sure why you'd change this. Perhaps if you use a lower resolution, you get some extra, um, you get lower latency out of it. I don't know if someone's compared that, but if not, then I don't think there's any reason to lower it. But it is cool that they've offered that option. But anyway, that's enough rambling. So I'm glad the two biggest issues that I brought up previously have been corrected, and the last it has an easy solution. But I definitely uh, do think they should add an option for an anti-axial dead zone that would have extremely useful applications across a huge number of games. So doing so would be pretty great to do. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and everyone, have a great rest of your day.